And now it's with my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker for the evening. I'm sure that he doesn't need much of an introduction. Many of you have heard his readings and writings, the support that he's given to multicultural, support that he's given to interfaith over the years. Our community particularly is grateful for the work that Paul has done. His work kept the foundation in the University of Victoria that gave our community the opportunity to form on the island. Paul has written many articles supporting immigration and security for all faiths and all traditions. Paul is especially important to us as a university professor. He is also the chair and supports the religious and social fundamentals that we have here this evening, supports our culture and our faith on the idea of harmonies and communities coming together. And with that, I'd like you to give him a warm hand for Paul Bramadat.
Good evening, everybody. Now, it's late, and we have about 20 more minutes for some conversation. Thank you for sticking around, those of you who are going to stick around for this final part of the conversation. I also want to thank you for joining us on what is, as many of you know, the final day of the Mayan calendar. It does seem, it almost begs for some kind of a joke to be told about that, but this is a multicultural event, and I suspect that would be inappropriate. But I would say I hope none of you paid for parking tonight. Well, welcome. Thank you to Samantha for inviting me, and thank you all for coming out. I am now faced with the daunting task of initiating and moderating a discussion period about music, this evening's music and music more broadly, and its potential to bridge the religious and cultural chasms that seem so common in our world. I am reminded of a comment usually attributed to David Bowie or Laurie Anderson, one of whom said, "Talking about music is like dancing about architecture." They raise an important objection to those who think the best response to anything is to talk about it. But if it is done with the right balance of sincerity and playfulness, it can be a perfectly appropriate response to what we heard tonight. And so now we talk a little bit about music, religion, culture, and politics. In my opening remarks, I don't want to pretend to offer you any definitive scholarly comments on music and religion. Such insights are way outside of my area of expertise anyway. What I do hope to suggest is some ideas we might discuss, some dance steps we might try together in the building the musicians have built for us this evening. I want to do this by telling 3 stories, 2 personal, 1 political, 2 serious, 1 silly, to start the conversation. Let me start lightly. A few years ago, as my wife and I drove through Winnipeg with the windows rolled down in our car one summer, we both found ourselves singing along to the chorus of that song from the early 1980s, which is usually known as the Pina Colada song, with that annoyingly infectious lyric, "If you like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain," I won't trouble your ears anymore. Those of you who were not here in the 1980s, and those of you who were doing other things and were not paying attention to Top 40 radio, you didn't miss very much, to be honest. But at one point in our singing, my wife made some clever comment about the relationship being described in the song. I just looked at her blankly. Relationship? Huh? So it turns out that the song is about a marriage in which each partner was dissatisfied with the relationship, so they each secretly put ads in the newspaper looking for a new relationship. And so, as it turns out, they each answered each other's secret ads and thereby fell in love. And as it turns out, the husband's ad began with, "If you like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain," blah, blah, blah. I guess that was important to him. Who knew? The point is that I had heard and I had sung that song dozens of times before in my life and had never actually paid attention to the lyrics. Never. That was one of the first times it actually occurred to me that songs on the radio had lyrics that listeners were expected to pay attention to. I know, it's really weird. But that goes to show you that when I listen to music, I listen to the melody and the rhythm, and my wife pays attention to the lyrics, the metaphors, the meanings. I know, she's really weird like that. Now, the second story. I am generally a fussy rationalist with an academic interest in, but a basic suspicion about, magical thinking. As a scholar of religion, I face the same challenges trying to have a normal religious life that sex therapists and gynecologists probably face trying to have a regular sex life. When I'm in a religious service and listening to religious music, I struggle not to deconstruct the experience, looking for the rhetorical sleight of hand, the clever techniques developed over centuries to get me to feel certain things and to accept certain claims. But with some pieces of music, my critical faculties get frozen and I am undone. I was raised as a Unitarian Universalist, and to this day, if I find myself in a Unitarian congregation, I have to work very hard to retain my emotional composure when the congregation sings the hymn, Spirit of Life. I could probably recite some of the lines in the song, and I expect that the words are warm and nice and positive and inclusive because that's just how Unitarians are. But it's not their rational content that makes me all weepy about this song. It's not the rational content of the words that moves me. It's something else altogether, something I can't quite name, and something I don't want to try to name. And finally, my comments this evening would not be complete if I didn't mention the now famous Christmas truces at the Western Front in the First World War. Now, these truces didn't happen all over the Western Front, and there were military commanders on both sides who thought that playing Silent Night over loudspeakers and asking soldiers to stop trying to kill one another was no way to run a war. But still, it's hard to imagine those truces without the sound of Silent Night playing in your own mind, isn't it? Without the music in the background, the political gesture seems almost impossible to imagine. Somehow, we all want to believe that music can disrupt otherwise deep enmities, otherwise deep and terribly destructive tribalisms. So what might these stories tell us? Perhaps they exemplify what Beethoven meant when he said, "Music is the one incorporeal entrance into a higher world of knowledge which comprehends humankind, but which humankind cannot comprehend." Of course, I added humankind rather than mankind, because my mother always taught me that if I said mankind, my teeth would fall out. But does Beethoven's comment not make of music something mainly mystical? Might it not also have a political significance? Is it not also the case that music enables us, even for just a few minutes, to transcend the narrow tribal, doctrinal, institutional, cultural boundaries we create to protect ourselves and our friends and to diminish our enemies? Doesn't this musical transcendence of the barbed wire most of us have around ourselves and our communities point toward the possibility of some higher form of human solidarity and perhaps even some divine preference for such peaceful communion? That is the not very profound and not very original thought I would like to say connects the Pina Colada song, the Christmas truce and the war, the Spirit of Life hymn, and Beethoven. And this is the thought I'd like us to consider, among others, as we enter into our discussion period for the last 15 or 20 minutes of this evening. So I believe there are microphones around. There's one there, and there's one there I can see dimly. We have also some folks who have written questions for us to consider. Now, again, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert in music, so I will read the questions out, and if there are people who would like to offer some suggestions or offer some reflections, I would be very happy to hear them. And you can have other folks hear them too by doing that. The first question or comment is this: music and chant is a common thread that runs through all faith groups. Sharing our songs, chants, and music with one another helps us break down the barriers we erect between us and them. Music brings us to we. Any comments or feedback on anything that happened this evening or on any of those questions? All right, I will ask another one. Oh, sorry. Who's saying hello? Oh, pardon me, go ahead, come on down.
Yes, that's a very interesting comment. However, I see a great chasm between, say, a Gregorian chant in a Catholic church and a modern gospel number in a Southern Baptist church in the United States, and the presentation that our Muslim friends did from Saudi Arabia this evening. So, does that really combine, or can we bring that sort of thing together? Or is that chasm too great?
Good question. What do you think?
What's the chasm? I don't see the chasm.
Our friend in the front doesn't see the chasm. Need it be a chasm. So one group is singing in Arabic, another group may be singing in Latin, and another in English. Some may be singing in groups that include both genders, young and old.
So I see that it's the entrenched beliefs in the music, as well as just the music. As you said yourself, you're attracted to the beat and the melodies and harmonies and things like that. But if we understand the words in the different songs or presentations, then I still see a bit of a problem there. I don't see how men of vastly different beliefs can come together. Even the music itself is quite different.
I see someone right in the middle of the front row back there. Yes, please. But the first questioner raises an interesting point, doesn't he? Because the point he raises is that although we may bring our hearts and we may enjoy the melody and the rhythm and the experience of being together and singing, the sort of raw physical experience of singing, in the end, if a particular song, say like Onward Christian Soldiers, for example, if that kind of song is articulating views of the divine or of one's neighbors that are, views that one can't really embrace, how does one keep singing?
I think there has to be tolerance, because we're not always going to agree, and it is like, many branches on one tree. I do feel, and the sentiments have been expressed tonight, that we're all one human family, and we're many branches on one grand tree. And sometimes many forms of music have been written a long time ago, and maybe they have a certain literal meaning that we might be more flexible with now in modern times, possibly, with getting to know other cultural groups, getting to know other people. We might have more flexibility and not take the language just so literally all the time.
Yes, well, point well made. But I come back to my observation about mankind, humankind in the Beethoven passage, and I'm just being devil's advocate here because I think this is an interesting issue you've raised. And I think that one of the problems with language, as with any kind of oral performance or any kind of theatrical performance, is that there is a certain public effect of singing things like that. I'll give you an example, but not from singing, but rather from marriage ceremonies. So many people say, well, look, I understand the history of the traditional Christian marriage ceremonies and the bride being given away to the husband by the father of the bride. And there are many folks who say, well, I can't possibly, receive my wife as a kind of a cow or something. And people would say in response, well, look, just even though that was the original intention of that particular gesture, you don't have to see it that way. You don't have to interpret that particular gesture in that particular manner. But then others would counter by saying, well, that may be the case. You may choose to reinterpret what it means for your fiance's father to put her hand in your hand. But nonetheless, you are performing that in front of 300 people who are not going to hear your reinterpretation of that particular gesture, or who are not going to hear your reinterpretation of saying mankind, for example, even though you may be thinking of all humans. And so it has a particular kind of problematic effect in the sense that you are essentially re-performing that hierarchy. You are re-performing that bias that's built into that act. So I'm just sort of being devil's advocate. I definitely hear what you're saying. There is another person at the mic.
I was just really struck by the presentation of the island through these performers and these cultures today. It also was interesting to me that so many of them represented religious points of view. And I was really grateful that they put words up there, or they gave the English equivalent. And it seemed that every one of them started at a heart place of gratitude and a heart place of being joyful. And that's a total contrast to my judgmental view of religion, which is men's innate egotism and needing to make something all-powerful and responsible and parental, which I don't particularly subscribe to, but tonight was just a beautiful presentation. Thank you.
Quite agree, yes. Yeah, that theme of gratitude and openness certainly was a common thread through all the songs. And where else but, well, perhaps it's just my own kind of nationalist prejudice that leads me to say, where else but in Canada would you have on one stage, all happily getting along, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, and extremely tall people? I mean, and little children, you know, I mean, it's a pretty remarkable thing we can do, that we can all get along backstage, in front of the stage, in intermission. It's pretty amazing, actually. But it is in some sense just a beginning. Can we get past the theological, the cultural content of some of those songs and prayers and chants? And what do you think? Can we? I mean, you seem to feel we can.
I sing in choirs, and we sing from music from all over the world. And I don't believe a lot of what's being sung, but it's fun singing. And fun isn't the holiest thing in the world.
So his observation, I don't know if those of you in the back heard it, but his observation was that he sings in choirs where they sing music from all over the world, and you don't believe many of the actual claims or, you know, statements that are being made in the songs that you're singing. But fun, essentially the pleasure of singing, the sort of raw physical pleasure of singing is sort of such a core experience for you. And I think that's wonderful. And if I would, you know, just to be the academic about it, I would say, you know, we are at one of the first times in human history where, you know, you would be quite comfortable singing a Hebrew song or a song in one of the African languages or in English, where you don't believe any of the theological, political, philosophical claims being made by the songwriter. This is one of the first times in human history where it would be so comfortable for you to do that, and many people would hear you and think, oh, that's wonderful that he could just enjoy a Hebrew song or an Arabic song that is making claims that none of which he can embrace. It's a really strange, I mean, I think in 500 years people will look back and they'll say, wow, I wonder what it must have been like to be that guy who sat here and said it was totally just fun to sing all these songs from different places in different languages, none of which you understand or embrace. I think we don't quite realize the time we're in and how peculiar it is, and how much of a turning point we're undergoing right now. Does anybody have trouble singing songs where the language is exclusive or the religious claims are problematic? Someone's waving their arms over there. Oh, please, go ahead, up in the lounge.
I know that, I grew up here in Nanaimo, and part of the hippie scene that sometimes people have a real aversion to saying the word God, and I didn't do for a long, long time, and so we usually just find another word for it to sing. I've gotten more comfortable with it, and I grew up Catholic and all. So a lot of folks who came from Christian grandparents or Christian, they were like, they don't like saying that word. They find it offensive or it takes over. And so yeah, that's an example.
Yeah, and I know a lot of my First Nations colleagues and friends struggle in their own personal religious lives coming to terms with those songs that have been part of their lives forever, and struggling with whether or not they can continue to have those words in their mouths without radically reinterpreting them. Actually, Andrew, I think you had a comment.
I'd like to pick up on two words from one of our earlier speakers about the heart space and then the egotism in religion. For example, as part of our closing song, we had the La ilaha, ilaha, illallah from the Quran. There is no God but God, if you like. And you can see, speaking of reinterpretation as well, if you're coming from a mystical heart space, you can read those words in a kind of deep ecology way, in a Sufi way, in a mystic way, that God is simply everywhere. And or you can read it in a tribalistic and exclusive way in which each one of us in our own religious or secular or non-religious way says, my tribe is, the only tribe, and my way is the only way. And it really is a matter of ego or the heart. And in my experience, when I've sung songs of compassion and songs of the heart, as I do regularly as part of my practice and work actually, from every tradition in different languages, as we did a little bit in that last song, I can see a difference between people simply thinking a thought and then people entering into that heart space of compassion. And in fact, I believe we can look back across time and history, whether it's 1500 and a Sikhism kind of origin, or whether it's going back thousands of years beyond that, to that you can trace the space of compassion and the heart and peace from every tradition, because it's built right into us. And even scientists now seem to be saying that is so, that we are hardwired, if you like, for compassion. So should it not be found in our music? I think I've kind of almost said more than enough here, but it's just to affirm that we can go into the space of the heart through music, or through ego, in a sense, we can stay back and look at things in exclusivistic and tribal ways, the very same material. That would be where I'd come from.
So we have about 2 minutes left before we call the evening to a close. One of the things I've always admired about the Sikh tradition is that when they have regular recitations of the Adi Granth, which is the Sikh holy text, the recitations, as I understand it, are done front to back. In other words, and even when there's not somebody in the room, the text is chanted. And when I asked a Sikh friend, well, why would you do that if there's essentially no audience, right? Because that's a very, if you will, Protestant notion that you have a kind of a congregation, you have a sort of sermon, you have kind of an hour and a half long package, and if there's no one in the audience, you just go home and call it a day. And these Sikh friends I had, they said, well, you continue the chanting even if there's nobody there, because the underlying notion is that the reading of the Adi Granth, which is the core message of, which contains the core message of Sikhism, the sheer experience of reading it sends out into the universe waves of compassion and knowledge and truth, which there doesn't have to be somebody right there to hear it for it to have a positive effect. And I've always been very touched by that and very inspired by that sensibility. Does that sensibility exist in other traditions that you know about? The Buddhist tradition with the prayer wheel, yeah, and certainly in some of them, yes, yeah. What else? What about Christianity? In Christianity, does one expect an audience, the audience of God, or the audience of a priest, or an audience in a kind of a Protestant context? Those of you from Christian backgrounds, what's your sense of it? Andrew?
Well, in the Anglican tradition, we always said there had to be at least one other person there for the priest to conduct Mass. But we've also got the tradition of the hermit and the monk and so forth, that there's a lot of private devotion and prayer that just carries on regardless. So there's a kind of balance between, I think, the individual life and then the corporate life, and then where those boundaries are. There's the minyan, the 10 people for a congregation in a Jewish context. So I think Christians have, in some ways, borrowed that number as well at some times. It's written in the Anglican canons there has to be 10 people if you want to form a new parish, for example, as a minimum on this island. But yes, we do a both and. I think we do some things very privately and carry on regardless, and others we definitely need a certain minimum number.
Great. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to let Greg wrap things up, but thank you for sticking around, and I hope to see you sometime in the future. Good night.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'd just like to wrap things up by saying thank you to the Central Vancouver Island Multicultural Society, the Interfaith Council. We do, of course, have to thank the provincial government and the federal government for providing the grants and the funding for this. And I'd like to thank the audience, everybody out there that helped to make this event possible. Your troopers for hanging in there till the very end, because I probably could thank you all individually, and it wouldn't take that long. But I won't. You've been here long enough. So give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you.